15,500 and 14,500. We've also had, I think, a much lesser demand that's helped us. Plus, we've had some good PV and wind generation resources. So just in looking at our partials, because of the weekend, we normally take the opportunity to do opportunity maintenance. So when you look at, the unplanned maintenance, the planned maintenance, it's above the 3,000 targeted, but that's a conscious effort to fix some of the units with boiler tube leaks, and once again, to also address the partial load losses. Just in terms of then what can we expect for the coming week is that we are expecting to have 2 units that returned yesterday, but looking at today, we are looking at 8 units. There are risks on 2 units, which will be about 4,000 megawatts. And then in the next 4 days, we're looking at an additional 2,700 megawatts. I think just to caution the issue around the diesel levels, we ideally would like to have our diesel levels above 90%. We know that we've been compensating load shedding by using diesel. The levels at Ankerluk are looking a bit lower. And once again, the main reason for the evening load shedding is to ensure that we can build up our water reserves. Then just in terms of the plan, as I shared from this morning's feedback, at this stage, we are looking at potentially stages 0 during the day and stages 3. But I think there is a potential of us maybe going to stage 1 and stage 4, but that will only communicate after we've completed the plan with the system ops. At this stage, I think we're seeing improved performance coming from some of the previous stations that were not performing. I think specifically when one looks at Camden, when one looks at Tutuka, when one looks at the likes of Arnott, Duva, and Kendall, they've definitely upped their game. So Michael, that's my feedback. I think in terms of capacity available, you're looking at 27,000 for today, and we should be able to manage, as we've projected a stage 1 for today, and then as we get into the evening, from 4 o'clock, we're going to stage 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for that. And colleagues in the media, I think if one had to put 1 or 2 pointers, it's quite a big shout out to colleagues who are working at those power stations that we've seen some improvement. So if any of you are watching our briefing or listening in, thank you very much, Eskom team in those places for doing the hard work and pushing up. And Eric, we also note that there's those areas of increased tube management, which for the whole year that ourselves and members of the media have been busy with this matter has been a perennial problem. So the more maintenance we can get done from what you're saying, it looks the better. So that's 2 takeouts for me, which look quite exciting. Thank you very much. If you would be kind enough then to just drop your screen, stop sharing, and then we can, I'm sure colleagues have had enough time. There is a presentation, colleagues, that Minister has got, and including this one. We are not going to flat it. Heliswa will circulate it via our media database for yourselves. So if you're not on the database, please feel free to pop your email in the chat here to Peli, and we will circulate the presentation that Minister will be making. Without further ado, Minister Ramokgopa, we are in your hands, sir. Good afternoon and welcome to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for members of the media for making time to join us this afternoon, and also to thank all the colleagues who are online. Just to say a few things at the onset. The first one is just to thank the leadership of Eskom, the board, under the stewardship of Mr. Mpomakwana and his collective, and the executive management team under the leadership of Mr. Kasim there for the exceptional work that they are doing. So there are 2 major victories that have been registered in the past few days. The first one is the 3-year wage agreement that has been reached with the major unions at Eskom, namely NUM, NUMSA, and Solidarity. That's significant because we have been making the point that one of the things that we have identified as an area that requires extensive and urgent attention to resolve the energy crisis in the country is to ensure that we address the issues of workers' grievance. I think the single biggest instrument that we have, the single biggest resource that is available to any institution is the workforce. So in this instance, we have had a workforce that has not been receiving any significant amount of incentives over a period of time, and that translated in the performance. And we can see now that we are trying to stabilize across the board, including the issues of worker interest and also what their demands are. So I really want to say thank you very much to the leadership of ESCOM for having concluded that, and also for the unions for having come to the party, lowering some of the demands, just expressing an appreciation, demonstrating rather an appreciation of what is confronting us and the need for us to work together to resolve the crisis that is confronting us. And then the second one is the development by DFFE for granting ESCOM an exemption, extending that exemption to May of 2025. That is significant in that it's going to allow us to return the 3 units at Kusile, Unit 1, 2, and 3. I mean, each they peg about 800 megawatts. So you're talking about 2,400 megawatts. And that's 2.5 stages of load shedding. So that's significant, and we really want to say to the country and the people in those localities that ESCOM will do everything possible to ensure that we minimize the impact of sulfur dioxide that gets to be emitted into the environment. I have to underscore the fact that although that we have these exemptions, ESCOM is meeting all the emissions parameters, barring the ones of sulfur content, the issues of particulate matter. We are meeting all of those licensing conditions. The one that we are in breach of, and that's why we have asked for an exemption, which is provided for in the legislative dispensation in the country, is the one relating to the sulfur dioxide, the content that gets to be emitted. And like I said, everything possible will be done to ensure that even in the light of the exemption, we still do everything possible to minimize its impact. And like I said, it's going to have a significant implication in relation to how we are going to improve performance. And then the third one is the consistent performance of the units at ESCOM. Remember that the mandate that the president had assigned to the ministry is in 2 parts. The first one is to lower the intensity of load shedding. And I'm sure everyone on the call here can accept that we have seen significant, tremendous improvement, and that has been consistent over a passage of time, and in this instance over a period of over 14 days. Of course, Eric does make mention of the underlying risks, and we'll do everything to ensure that we address what those risks are. I'm going just by way of a slide just to illustrate to you what is it that we are achieving in the form of numbers, so that you get to have an appreciation. So you can see that we're running a 5-day average period. You can see the first one on the capacity that is available. So essentially the degree to which we are able to generate the electrons and to make them available to the grid. So we're sitting at the 5-day average over the past week was about 29,288 megawatts versus the previous week of 28,889 megawatts. So you can see that there's been significant improvements there. So we have added, if you like, approximately about 400 megawatts, and that's significant in that it's an illustration of a consistent improvement. And what that has done, as Eric has indicated, the more the units perform, the more it gives you opportunity to execute planned maintenance. And you can see that planned maintenance has gone up from the previous week of 3,302 megawatts. It's sitting at 3,451 megawatts. So that's important because the more you have the units performing, the unit being consistent, it gives us, if you like, a breathing space for us to execute planned maintenance. And these results will be seen over a period of time. The resilience, if you like, of the grid to be able to meet the demands. And then the unplanned capability loss factor, that is the rate at which these units are failing. The average has come down by about 700 megawatts. So we're sitting at the current 5-day average is about 15,157. This is the 15,870. What is significant really, which is a point, is that for the first time, you can see we're beginning to go below the what I call a psychological mark of 15,000 megawatts. So we have registered multiple instances where we have gone beyond below the 15,000 megawatt of unplanned capacity loss factor, which essentially again is an illustration of the degree to which the improvements are made, and we're able to keep that consistent over a period of time. And you can see that the system is beginning to perform. And then the other one is partial load losses. So partial load losses versus the UCLF. UCLF is the trip, so these units are not available. And the partial load losses, you are running these units, but they are not running at their optimal capacity. So it's important that you are able to address this so that we get the most out of the designed capacity of these units. So you can see that again, we've recorded about 700 megawatts improvement in the partial load losses. And of course, this is against a peak that is going up. So although demand is going up, we're still able to maintain this permutation of zero load shedding, no load shedding between midnight and 4 p.m. and then introducing stage 3 between 4 p.m. and midnight. We've been able to keep at that even when there's been an increase in the demand. Again, an illustration of the performance of these units. An area that requires attention is the issues around the outage slips. The outage slips really speaks to our inability to meet the promise to return the units at the time that we had said we will be in a position to return these units. Of course, you can see that that number has gone up by approximately 80 megawatts. And the point that Eric was making is that it's an area that is receiving our attention going forward. So I thought that is important that we have an appreciation that the improvement, of course, like I said previously, they are marginal but significant. They are marginal in that you see 1 percentage point improvement followed by another percentage point improvement. I mean, just to give you a sense, I mean, if you look at the period, I think it was about June the 15th, we are able to ramp up planned maintenance to about 10%. And this was made possible because of the improvements that we have registered. I mean, at the time, the breakdowns of the units went below the psychological mark of 30% of installed capacity to about 28%. So that's an illustration of a system that is improving. We have seen that we have stations, on average, we have about 6 stations that whose energy availability factor is now exceeding 70%. To give you an appreciation, just yesterday, Camden, which is one of the stations that was meant to be closed now, is giving us about, on Friday rather, gave us an EAF of 81%. So you can see that there's a consistent improvement there. And if the unit 1, 2, 3 of Kusile comes on stream, and of course, the Unit 1 in Quebec had not gone out. We'll be flatting now with an EAF of, with the EAF will be flatting with about 70%. So we're getting much closer to the target that we had set ourselves. We are beginning to achieve that significantly earlier than what we had promised. And the benefit will be to the South African economy, the households, and our ability to ensure that we achieve the levels of growth that are necessary to be able to improve, if you like, the performance of the economy. And then there's also improvements that we're seeing working with the local authorities. We did say that we'll do everything possible to ensure that we improve embedded, small-scale embedded generation, that we're able to get these electrons on stream. They must constitute part of the grid. And we're beginning to see that the municipalities that they are working with us, and we're beginning to see some improvement. I mean, Drakenstein, City of Cape Town, Nelson Mandela Bay, Buffalo, what they've done is they've processed the embedded generation applications, and they do compensate customers to feed into the grid. And I think that's it's a revolution in that it's going to incentivize even more customers to install solar PV, enter into a dispensation to provide for a feed-in into the system. And in that way, you are expanding, if you like, your generation capacity. And in fact, those that are installing these PVs, they are able to recover the cost of the capital cost of putting up those PVs, and the return on investment is going to be realized much quicker, and that is an added incentives. And in this way, we are beginning to see, if you like, a multiplicity of generation platforms in the country. Of course, our recent visit to Vietnam has indicated that there are pitfalls to this exercise, that you should be very careful at the rate at which you are introducing new generation capacity from solar PV, because that has got the capacity to also collapse the grid. So the issues around grid strengthening are important for you to be able to realize this benefit. We have seen now that municipalities like Polokwane, Rustenburg, Govenberg, Msunduzi, eThekwini, and KwaDukuza are in the process of evaluating these embedded generation applications. Although they've not gotten to a stage of compensating customers to feed into the grid, it's a conversation we're having with them, so that we're able to expand the flow of generation capacity, so that we're able to not only eliminate load shedding, but build energy resilience in the country going forward. So there's significant improvement working with local authorities to ensure that the reforms that have been introduced with regards to embedded generation, removing the requirement for licensing, essentially registering, that benefit can be realized for as long as we are able to ensure that there's a form for feed-in amongst others, but also arrangement. And I did say in our last briefing that we are working on a willing framework so that we make it possible for independent generators to transact with the private sector off-takers, and we're able to use the installed infrastructure of both ESCOM and municipalities to transport the electrons, and the net benefit will be to the entire grid, and we're able to expand the flow of what is available to us. What are some of the milestones that we have achieved? We did say the last time that we're launching the winter campaign. We've appointed a service provider with the necessary expertise to work with us, so that we amp up the message in relation to demand side interventions. We did make the point the last time that our target is to reduce demand by about 1,000 megawatts in the next 6 months, and we'll remain on track to do that. Of course, we'll share with you at the right time the kind of progress and the traction that we're seeing, and that is a function of our ability for us to be very aggressive in people's faces, just trying to make a case on why we need to reduce demand. And we did say that we will finalize the revised grid capacity allocation principles, and following input from stakeholders, the interim grid capacity allocation rules have been published by Eskom, and these rules will be implemented in parallel to their incorporation into the grid code by NERSA. A significant development that is also going to help us to ensure that we address the issues of load shedding. We have on previous occasion indicated that we are establishing a one-stop shop for energy project. And I want to say that that one-stop shop is being established by DTIC, which will coordinate regulatory processes for energy projects in the country, and this will be launched in July of 2023. So in the next 6 weeks, we'll be launching that once the necessary capacity and systems are in place. And the last time, also, again, we did talk about the what we refer to as the omnibus bill, its finalization. And of course, we have gotten legal support expertise to help us to fast track that process to support the work that we're doing in NICOM, and also the development of the bill to streamline the regulatory framework for renewable energy project and transmission infrastructure. I must say that the department, the ministry is also putting together, if you like, an approach on how we can finance rather the transmission infrastructure. I did say the last time when we met that Eskom has computed the requirements for us to expand the transmission infrastructure and strengthen the grid, and that modeling suggests that we'll need anything in the order of magnitude of about 210 billion rands. And given the if you like, the balance sheet constraints of Eskom, and also the fact that it's not allowed to go out and borrow, we need to think creatively on how we can tap into the liquidity that's sitting in the private sector to help to roll out at an accelerated pace the grid infrastructure to be able to aid the new generation capacity, which is principally your wind and PV. And of course, we have modeled the fact that your best wind speed and the best irradiation levels are located in areas that don't have grid capacity. So for as long as we don't find a solution to resolving how we're going to expand and strengthen the transmission, we are not going to be able to benefit from this new generation capacity. So the strengthening of the grid and its expansion is sitting on the critical path, and the key issue there, it's about the financing. Like I said, we have put together a document, and of course it will be socialized internally in government, and then we'll take it out to the public to say this is how we see the best way of addressing the transmission challenge in the country. And then we did on the issues around the reforms on how you want to dismember Eskom, have a generation company, transmission entity, and also distribution. We did say that we are making progress in this regard, and then we foresee that the appointment of the board, independent board on the transmission will be happening very soon. Minister Kgosientsho is on top of the issues there, and this requires securing a decision on outstanding license application from NERSA, as well as of course the appointment of like I said, this will then culminate in the appointment of the board going forward. We're still on track in relation to our bid window number 7. Remember, I did say that this will happen before the end of July. And just to recap, 5,000 megawatt of wind and solar, a battery storage of 1,200 megawatts, and gas of 3,000 megawatts. And the RFP for the load shedding reduction program of 700 megawatts and the cross-border procurement program of 1,000 megawatts. And this program collectively, if you aggregate them, will give us an additional 10,000 megawatts of new generation capacity. So it's important that we are able to accelerate this. Of course, we'll still require a concurrence from NERSA, and of course we'll do the necessary ministerial determination so that we're able to roll out, if you like, realize this bid window and ensure that we're able to bring these megawatts onto the grid. Like I said before, the success of bid window 7 is the ability to which we're able to match where these projects are located to areas that have got sufficient grid capacity to be able to accommodate this additional generation. And then as I conclude, I'm sure you have seen that we received the leadership president received the premiers of Denmark and the Netherlands, and on the sidelines of that, the ministry ourselves, electricity, were able to sign with Netherlands a facility that is going to help us to accelerate the project in the green hydrogen space. On Tuesday, we are signing with the Vice Chancellor of Germany. Again, they are creating a facility, working with us, the Ministry of Electricity, to ensure that we introduce a financing facility to be able to fast track the realization of green hydrogen project. I'm mentioning this because for us to be able to achieve energy resilience, we need to look at the various technologies that are available to ensure that we broaden the flow of generation in the country. And the green hydrogen is something that is receiving attention, and of course we are engaging with some of the major economies in the world, Western economies, to ensure that they are able to provide the necessary financing, of course meeting our own requirements to ensure that we build a next generation of technologies that are going to help us to address the issues of energy sovereignty in the country. So, Michael, I really want to conclude by saying that we do feel the pain of our people. We know that the businesses still remain under a serious strain, everything possible to ensure that we resolve the question. You can see that there's notable progress. 2/3 of the day, about 16 hours of the day, we have not been having load shedding in the past 2 weeks or so. Only at night we have stage 3 load shedding. But the ultimate intention is to ensure that we do away with load shedding. And once we eliminate load shedding, the next assignment is to make sure that we build a resilience to ensure that we have sufficient energy generating capacity from multiple energy generating technologies to ensure that the economy is able to grow at a rate that is able to create jobs and meet our developmental imperatives. So thank you very much, Michael, for the opportunity. We will take the questions. Thanks.
Minister, thank you very, very much. And I think those last words about the vision of the future, that we will have energy, we'll have lots of it, and our economy will grow, and we will get through this tough time as a nation. So thank you very much, Minister Ramokgopa. I just want to check, I don't see Rudy on the chat. Rudy, are you here?
I am.
He's there. So, ladies and
I'm
gentlemen,
on Minister Ramokgopa's link, so I'm Minister Ramokgopa.
Oh, I see, Rudy. Well done. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, allow me to invite my esteemed colleague Rudy Dix just to do a few of the top-ups from the NECOM meeting, and over to you, sir.
No, I just wanted to say I think Minister Ramokgopa has covered it extensively and succinctly provided an update. So I don't think there's anything else to add on. I mean, we'll cover both the questions on specific areas where we can. Thanks, Mike.
Perfect, Rudy. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen in the media, thank you very much. We already have a number of questions, and thank you to Eric, who has already started fielding a few. So please, colleagues, number one, feel free to type. I think, Peliswa, I think we will be able to take 1 or 2 verbal questions. So for now, let's start off with those we have here. And I'm sure Minister and Rudy and Eric, you can follow in the Q&A chat there. So Eric has had a few already, and Eric, you might want to give a sweep on those. Chris was mentioning the systems report indicating winter demand lower, plus a drop in residual demand. forecasting demand flattened, but indicate some of the reasons for this. So Rudy, Eric, you may want to touch on that. And you may want to just give a quick taste to the question Chris asked about the German partnership. And then Carol Payton. Carol had a few questions relating to the exact reason for the nexus between cold weather this time of the year and the improvements in our losses, just to have a clearer technical explanation of that. And then also then we have Arissa. Eric is mentioning lower demand, but the minister was saying higher demand. What is our current demand? And Arissa, with your permission, I'm not going to field the question of why are load shedding levels lower now. I think Minister was quite articulate on why we're seeing that, as was Eric, okay? Catherine Child of Business Day, and Catherine, I also note yours is one of the hands up. Is there a date for the board for the National Transmission Company? I think Minister may have alluded to that already, Catherine, that it's in way, but we can hear. And then Brian, greetings. You have modeled how the 10 billion transmission, have we modeled how the 210 billion rand transmission investment will impact prices? Will it be phased in? Or, I mean, obviously in that question is a sense of, oh my, are we going to be paying a lot more? And then Catherine is also asking, why are Tutuka, Camden and Arno not doing much better? Is there less sabotage or is there better quality coal? So Catherine wants to know what, Eric, are some of those critical success change factors. Jan Vermeulen, my broadband, can we get an update on the appointment of the SKO and Minister Ramokgopa? Perhaps we can, we might not. Minister Chaveni deferred that question from our post-CAD briefing on Thursday to today's briefing. So if there's anything, obviously we might hear, but if not, Jan, you'll just give us some time for those processes to follow. Terence has another one. What are the output levels? What output levels will Kusile 1, 2, and 3 be able to operate using the temporary stacks? Brian Kamazi, greetings and apologies for not introducing himself. He's from a trade union. What is the current funding status of the generational reliability program for the coal fleet? How much further is required? I think the minister may have touched on that, but Brian, he'll indicate. And then Retumetse Makuya of Citizen. I saw the introducing of a process of implementing the load limiting power in 4 ways. Was there a noticeable use of the plan? And what appliances should people switch off in this plan? And then, Minister and colleagues, I do want to point a question here, or not a question, a comment from Chris Yelland. He would like to congratulate you, Minister Ramokgopa, on the new energy and the urgency that has been brought to the electricity sector. Visits around the world, briefings on a Sunday are indeed refreshing, and improvements in the results are beginning to show. So Mr. Yelland, I really appreciate that comment, and I'm sure the minister may have noted it as well. And then, Eric has made a number of responses to questions already there, but I will then give an opportunity now, Minister, for you to kick off on some of those. And if there's one I may have overlooked in this first round, please do. And then, colleagues, with permission, because I'm ending off round 1 now, there's another one from Zakele Madela. Minister, the question is to you. Is in going forward ahead to stop the decommissioning work that is currently underway? If so, will coal power stations be decommissioned still? By when? And where, considering that we are still in the energy crisis? Why not have them running on both renewables whilst we continue with coal? And I mean, I think that's a question we know. There's an anonymous one. Eskom going forward ahead to stop. Okay, well, it's the same one. So you're not anonymous, Zakele. And it was a very interesting question, Zakele. So thank you for that. So Minister, I'm going to ask if you'd like to kick the ball off. Please, for round 2, I'm going to ask that any colleagues, and I'd really prefer it for colleagues who haven't had an opportunity on round 1, we will open it for a voice comment, seeing as we have a little bit of time, and I'll request 1 or 2 colleagues, then you can pose your question on the group. So with permission, Minister, if I could start with you, and then Eric, you'll do a mop-up. Please, Eric, if you could just cast your eye on the group as well, in case I overlooked anything. Minister Ramokgopa.
No, thank you very much, and thanks to members of the media for those questions, and thank you very much, Chris, for those words of encouragement. Of course, we do everything possible, working with everyone in the space to improve the situation. Just on the issues around the confusion of demand going up or whether it's coming down. So what Eric was referring to, so Eskom has done a winter forecast, and in terms of the worst case scenario of that winter forecast, we had anticipated that the demand will be at about 34,000 megawatts. So where we are way below the 34,000 megawatts. So that's the reduction that Eric is referring to. What I was sharing with you was a 5-day interval of what demand was. So if you look at the 5-day period, the one that we are in now, we just came, that ended on the 23rd of June, the average demand is at 30,000 megawatts. But the 5 days before that, the average demand was at about 29,000 megawatts. So that's the increase I'm talking about. But even with the current increase that you are seeing at 30,000 megawatts, it's still lower than what we had focused in the worst case scenario. So I thought I must just clarify the two. Eric was talking about demand relative to the worst case scenario. I'm talking about demand relative to the 2 5-day intervals that are before us. The immediate past 5 days and the 5 days before that, we have seen an increase in demand, and the average is at 30,000. And I go further to make the point that in spite of that increase, we still have that permutation of between midnight and 4 p.m. We don't have load shedding, and then we have stage 3 coming in. Of course, I did make the point that we are doing a computation is a function of complicated modeling in relation to what it will take, what are the options that are available to be able to finance, if you like, grid expansion and grid strengthening. And of course, the issues around it's the implications on the price. It's things that will be answered once that the modeling is completed. But of course, someone must carry that price. It doesn't come free. I mean, it's I think it's how market conditions operate. But of course, we do everything possible to ensure that is cost reflective and is the least cost path that is available to us. And the installed capacity of the 3 units at Kusile is about 800 megawatt each, of course, and then there's also what they are able to dispatch. It's something that we will get to know once we start firing the units. But the intention is that even with the exemptions, we want to run them at full capacity. Of what is their design capacity. Really, that's what we intend to do. And then, like I said, we take the necessary measures to ensure that you reduce any adverse impact in relation to the sulfur dioxide. I said all other emissions parameters, we really are not seeking any significant, any form of exemptions. And in relation to the appliances, so we have done the modeling and suggest that households consume about 16.5% of installed capacity. At peak, they can consume about 35%. And if you look at the configuration of that 35% at peak, anything between 30 to 50% of that 35% is on account of geysers. So if you like, the primary target that we want to derive savings from is the geysers really. And that's why we are going to get the maximum input, if you like, returns. And that's why we are targeting the geysers. Of course, the technology that exists provides us an opportunity not only to do the geysers, but to do everything that is on the DB board that can be remotely disconnected. So the point I'm making is that the minimum flow is the geysers, but the technology that exists and using GSM technology allows for you to also remove other appliances from demanding electricity from the grid. And to Zakele's question, yes, we said we're talking about delayed decommissioning of the coal-fired power stations. And I did say that we have commissioned a study that does the modeling in relation to first the emissions, what that means in practical terms, the emissions level, and also it will also do the modeling in relation to the period of the delayed decommissioning. So we are not in a position to provide that answer now. But what I can tell you now is that we are not decommissioning. To your point, I mean, we're in the midst of the crisis. There's an energy deficit. So I think that it will be an irrational decision to decommission. And if you look at the performance of the power stations, the power station that was meant to be decommissioned now, at least units in those power stations, is Camden. And I did say to you earlier on that Camden achieved 81% energy availability factor on Friday. And it has been consistent, Camden. So I guess that is a point I'm making. You can't just take it out when in fact we are unable to illustrate where are we going to get these additional megawatts, one to replace that which we are taking out, but also to add more to be able to eliminate load shedding. Thanks, Chris. I'll leave that to Eric and Rudy, the rest.
Minister, just one I want to ask if you wouldn't mind looking at just before I pass to Eric. There's a very interesting one here from Carol that says, what models are we looking at to get the investment into the transmission grid? Are you looking at build, operate, transfer? And then we have from Zodwa. Zodwa, you didn't say your media house, but you were asking a bit, Minister, she's just asking for a bit more elaboration on this winter campaign that you mentioned that's going to run in all provinces and exactly what it's about. So perhaps just those two, and then I'll ask the other two colleagues to come on. Thanks, Minister.
Oh, yes, Carol. What's the problem that's confronting us? So you have a situation where there's new generation capacity that's coming from renewables. And that generation capacity is really concentrated. The density of those projects are in areas where you don't have grid capacity. So you're talking the Western Cape, the Eastern Cape, and the Northern Cape. The Northern Cape is really around PV. The Western and Eastern Cape is around the wind, because the wind speed are much better in those localities. And if you look at the configuration of the grid, is that it's concentrated in your Northeast, because coal power stations were constructed at the mouth of the source, and in this instance is coal, so it's next to the coal fields, and that's where the grid strength is located at Northeast, and there's an absence of grid to the south. So you need to, for you to benefit from this new generation capacity from renewable, you need to locate it closer to areas where it gives you the best renewable, if you like, generation capacity. Now we know that the Eskom balance sheet is very weak, and that the Eskom is not in a position, also as part of the condition of the fiscal support that National Treasury has extended to Eskom, is not allowed to borrow. Of course, the minister can create exemptions, but we know that the private sector is sitting with liquidity. There's a big liquidity that is with the private sector, but it's not our intention for the state to relinquish ownership of the grid. The state must still remain in control of the grid. So the models we have is exactly that. You need to think about build, operate, transfer. And so what I was saying earlier on was that we are looking at those models, including what you have just said, Carol. And once we have gone to arrived at the situation of what is the best model that is suitable to allow us, one, to get the benefit of new grid, new generation capacity, the state having ownership of the grid, and also tapping on the big liquidity that there is with the private sector. It is that model that satisfies all these three that will be presented as a solution. So we have not really concluded on what exactly that model is, but it's not far away from build, operate, transfer in the same manner that we're building national roads, the N3, the N1, our major arterials. Central ownership resides with the state, but we are concessioning them, and then you introduce toll gates for those who are users to pay the user fee principle. And I guess it's something that can be extended into the energy sector, and then we'll work on how that the configuration works in this space without overburdening the end consumer. The issues of tariffs are going to be important, because you don't want energy to be unaffordable or to be the exclusive domain of the affluent and rich, and undermining our ability for universal access, connecting the poor onto the grid. So you can see the complexity of this equation. There are multiple variables that requires attention, and that's why I said we'll come back to you and share the details. And then with regards to the question of the campaign, yes, we did say that we have appointed a service provider to work with us. I guess that the detail will come out of the people with the expertise on how you are able to mobilize society behind an agenda that is for the common good, and the good of the country in this instance, ensuring that we are able to address the energy security in the country. So I really don't have, as we speak now, what those details are. Perhaps Rudy can share that with us. But the target is that in the next 6 months, we really want to shave 1,000 megawatts without undermining households' ability to meet their daily needs, without undermining industry to be able to give the necessary returns to their shareholders. So we're working on that, and of course we'll announce the details as and when we approve that strategy. But we've already started. This platform does what this
Okay, so I think we've just lost Minister a bit there.
That's one.
Are you back, Minister?
Is it the minister or us?
It could be us, yeah. Okay.
No, I can hear you.
Right. So Zodwa, the challenge that I've really, on that latter question, Rod Zodwa, we're really asking, including part of this conversation that we have at least weekly, help us, Zodwa. Minister has said, obviously, the management of the Giza is one of the biggest things, right? So please, Zodwa, if you could help us get the message out, don't switch on what you don't need, etc. That's very much part of what we'd like to do. So, okay, I see Mr. Dix is ready. Eric, I'll take Rudy to just wrap up that side of the thing, and then we'll end off with yourself. Thank you, Rudy.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Minister. If you can still hear us. Yes, of course, I think that as Minister had indicated, let's start off with the last point. I think it emphasized that our winter demand program is about saving a modest 1,000 megawatts over the next few months. And that's, as he expressed, switch off the appliances, and particularly Giza, which is the most important component of our, highest component of our electricity consumption throughout. There's been a couple of questions, Michael, around what has been the reasons for the lower demand forecast than what was expected. We don't have those particular reasons right now, unless Eric has, but I think it would be useful for us in the next briefing session, Eric, to provide the media sense of what has it been. Has it been because of the success of our campaign? Has it been that demand has just been flat and we've been able to get quite a bit of savings from industrial customers? I think it would be useful for us to disaggregate that, if we don't have the details, to provide that in the next briefing session, so that I think both if I see Chris and Terence's questions regarding what is the major reasons for why we see a lower demand forecast, and I know you've attempted to answer some of that, so I think that would be quite critical. On the question on the National Transmission Company of South Africa, these names have not been provided to the president. Let's understand the process, colleagues, that as we move towards the registration of the national, the registration of the National Transmission Company has already taken place. What we require is, of course, for it to be operationalized, and 3 licenses would have to be issued by NERSA. Once that is done, it then can fully operate. It's already done its separations of financials. It's already done the separation of the staffing. What is required is the licenses and the board. The board is appointed by the Eskom, since the NTCSA, as its first phase, would be a subsidiary of Eskom. So that requires the board of Eskom to make the recommendations on that. Now, as you said in the briefing, we are aiming to finalize both the licensing applications. That's important. And as I understand it, the NERSA Electricity Regulatory Committee is looking at it in the first week of July to consider this. And then, of course, hopefully finalize these applications by the end of July. We are working in tandem and ensuring that the board is also appointed by the end of July. So this is the process that we're following. We are slightly behind schedule, as you've indicated. We have given indications before on a much more earlier timeframes, but now that has been shifted. So we are looking at it towards the end of this coming month, and that's going to be quite important going forward. Just the last comment that I wanted to make in support of what Minister had saying on the decommissioning, and it's quite important for us to understand that, because I think we've mentioned this quite critically before. The Minister, of course, is absolutely correct, and as he expressed the view that you are unable to decommission when we have an energy shortage. The major focus of what we are doing right now, and even in our engagements with the international partners, right, and those who are giving us concessional borrowing or grants, is that they need to understand that, and they have come on board to understand the energy shortage. So for us, delayed decommissioning is going to be an important area that we're going to look at, particularly when, as Minister says, where there are stations, power stations like Camden, for example, or parts of Grootvlei, for example, that are expected to be decommissioned, that have an ability to put on additional megawatts onto the grid. So that is our major focus going forward. And I think it's going to be quite critical for us to engage with our partners, to engage with a whole set of different partners who are quite important. It is also part of the exercise, and we just want to re-emphasize this. It's part of the initial exercise that has been part of the debt conditions that the Minister of Finance had announced in February. That part of that assessment that they are doing through that consultancy group is to assess a whole set of different interventions, including whether we delay decommissioning, what power stations may be considered for continued operations, what power stations, as it is in the budget review, may be considered for, for whether there are partnerships that can be brought into certain power stations, and where there are decommissioning that does take place at the later stage, that what are the kind of approaches that we could look at? Do we have a similar model that has happened at Komati, or do we have, as we move towards repurposing of power stations, do we have different models that would be considered? And this is important considerations that are given as part of that exercise that is continuing in going forward. I wanted to just add on the last point on the different models for the transmission company. And as colleagues from the media would know, that a big chunk of this is being supported through the Just Energy Transition Partnership, the $8.5 billion commitment. A large chunk of that has been indicated by partners that they wish to invest in the grid strengthening, the transmission network. And there are, of course, a whole set of conversations that are being had with Treasury and the partner groups as to what sort of form this takes. And Minister spot on as he emphasizes the point around different models of ownership that, not ownership, different models of investment that would take place And these are currently being explored and considered as part of the overall strategy around how we deal with the shortage around grid transmission. I just want to emphasize again in the last few sessions that we've done, there is a particular exercise that's currently underway to try and strengthen the grid within the existing grid system. Eskom transmission team is looking at investments, short-term investments in 25 transformers, 25 transformer programs that are there that has the potential to unlock about 12 gigawatts of energy. That is part of the program, but that does not replace the need for hard capex, high voltage cables, and of course pylons to be invested. So we're running these programs as important as they are in tandem. One, looking at short-term measures so we can get about additional 12 gigawatts through investments in the transformer programs, and that's about 12 transformers that have been looked at, as well as looking at different models of investment to try and unlock investment in grid expansion and investment in high voltage cables going forward. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Minister, as well.
Thank you, Rudy. And please, I really appreciate that. Eric has done great justice, colleagues, to some of your questions in the chat there. Please, could you have a look at those? Carol, for example, there's some specific answers about deadlines. But with that being said, I'm going to ask Eric to mop up the first round. Minister, there's a very interesting question there from Zakele about the Vietnam case study, and a very interesting one about small modular nuclear plants, which for me sounds quite interesting, Zakele. Perhaps, Minister, if you could just have a peep at that question while Eric mops up. And then, Rudy, there's one there from Mtunzi Lutuli that seems to relate to the costing of grid. Perhaps we haven't covered it fully. You might cast to us. Eric, let's have a listen. What would your mop-up be? But thank you so much, Eric. And colleagues, please, I do want to remind you, have a look in the A part of the Q&A. We have good responses. Eric?
Thank you, Michael. I'll try to cover high level some of the questions raised, but we'll also go through these questions and provide formal responses. I think what I need to highlight on the generation side, when one looks at the breakdown performance, when you look at about a month ago, we were trending anything between 18,500 to 19,000 in breakdowns. And when you now see the breakdown performance, it trends between 14,500 and 16. So there's at least a 3,000 megawatt improvement on breakdowns. And if you remember, when we actually communicated the winter outlook, we were very specific about bringing breakdowns to below 15,000 to manage scenario 1 of the load shedding stages. So that, I think I have to make very clear, definitely an improvement on the generation performance. We've seen it specifically at Tetuka, we've seen it at Duva, we've seen it at Kendall and Majuba. And I think one has to also give credit to the new group executive who made it his priority to dispatch high experienced power station general managers to some of these power stations. And I think we'll start to see the improvement, early days, but definitely improvement. The second lever was to keep planned maintenance to below 3,000. And I think, with us having, for example, the long weekend over the 16th of June, we use these long weekends with a low demand to do opportunity maintenance. But once again, the system operated together with our planning and production guys, look at the supply and the demand side when making these decisions. Lastly, we've had, this year confirmed the funding and the diesel supply storage. So that, I think, against the backdrop to previous years, we could actually, compensate for not load shedding when we do have the morning peaks and the higher evening peaks. What I need to highlight to complement the feedback from both the Minister and Rudy is effectively from the 1st of June, with the new winter tariff kicking in, a lot of the major intensive energy users then have their planned shutdown. Haven't done the exact calculations, but we've seen potentially anything between 850 and 1,000 megawatts drop because of plant being shut down. So that would be some of the contributing reasons. But what I also need to add, when one looks at the winter season, generally we get cold fronts. The cold fronts mean good wind generation coming from the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape, obviously clearing the Western and the Eastern Cape. We see sometimes megawatts up to 2,000 megawatts. Sadly, the cold fronts are followed by the cold low troughs, and that could mean once again no wind. So there's this variation of anything between 150 megawatts and 2,000 megawatts. Sadly, we get hit with a double whammy, because when you get the cold fronts hitting the high veld, then you get consumption increasing. But generally, I think in terms of the trend, thanks to the Minister for clarifying what I meant when we did the actual winter outlook, it was a projection. It's a plan based on the models from previous years. Then what I need to also add is that we've seen good PV generation. Sadly, with some of the cloudy days that we have, overcast days in Gauteng, we've seen a drop in rooftop. And I think lastly, which Rudy, I will work through the distribution executive, there are some efforts underway in terms of the DSM, just to confirm how much we've recovered, on the demand side from the Eskom side. So I think that's just in terms of the overall. Just to answer some of the other questions, I think in terms of the VGB review, there's a meeting planned between National Treasury and the Eskom executives next week. I think this is just to address the draft report and potentially some of the low-hanging fruit. But this report should be formalized and finalized by the end of July. And I think once that's done, that will be communicated widely. A lot of it will be linked to the generation conditions to meet the loan agreements. I'm just going through some of the other issues. I think in terms of the loads, Kusile, the Kusile units are planned to run at 720 megawatts. You've heard the exemption now given from DFFE to actually operate the units from November and December. I think these units will start up loading around 520 megawatts. Once again, we'll be looking at the emissions that will be constantly measured. And I think based on then the outcomes, they'll probably load the units at a higher level. Those, I think, some of the questions I've got from my side, Mike. I'm not sure if there's any other issues, but I think just to highlight that overall, we definitely have seen an improved performance. On the partials where we believe there's still work that must be done, I think together with the group executive and the management team, we've now zoomed into exactly where the challenges lie. On the partials, we see that when one looks at the boilers, when one looks at the turbines, there's no problems there. It's the actual surrounding plant that we call the ancillary and auxiliary plant. We've identified problems around the mills, milling equipment, cooling towers, and I think we'll start to address them in the coming months. Some of them we can repair online, and some of them will be done through the major outages planned in the summer months.
Thank you very much. Peliswa, could we invite colleagues? I don't know what's happened, but my assistant doesn't want to show me any of your names today. But there's a Z Lutuli. Can we invite Mr. or Miss Z Lutuli, Peli, to pose their question? And then also Mtunzi Lutuli. Unless you're the same person, unless you are two Lutulis, but let's have that colleague posing their question. And then I'd like to draw attention perhaps to yourself, Eric. There's a very interesting question there about the improvement of EAF from Anonymous, who I assume is Zakele. And then Minister, a question from Kolani there about our jet. Are we the case study, or do we have a plan or a sense of another country that's done better than, or has already done it as well? So, Peliswa, unless because my assistant's unable to show me any hands, I have a Z Lutuli, and I'd like to invite that colleague to pose a question, and then anybody else, Pelisa, that I can't, and the Xolani here. So, Peli, could we invite those two colleagues, please?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Chairperson. It's Mthunzi Luthuli.
Mthunzi, okay. And you are one Luthuli, not two.
No, I'm one.
Okay,
there's also
great.
another
Yes.
Luthuli as well.
Oh, okay. So we'll take the second Luthuli, and then we'll take Xolani.
Alright.
Those are the three hands I'll take. Over to you, Mr. Luthuli.
Okay. The minister mentioned that ESCOM will need to spend about 210 billion rand to build transmission lines so that you know, the renewable energy projects can be connected to them. Okay. Now my question is, with 210 billion rand, you could almost build 2 6-pack conventional power stations, and we are spending this money just to build transmission lines to connect intermittent plants that have a capacity factor of 25% and around 32% for wind. And my question is, does the renewables energy program, as it is currently structured, make any financial and technical sense? And this is not taking into account the fact that we will actually need to spend more money to strengthen the grid due to the loss of system in Asia. The minister just alluded to the fact that this is what he learned in Vietnam. Some of us have been saying this for a long time, that when you increase the penetration of renewables, you lose system in Asia, and that makes your grid unstable and less reliable. So the question is, does it really make sense from a technical perspective and from a financial sense to go the way we're going? We're not saying we shouldn't do renewables, but I think what we're saying is we haven't thought this process through properly. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Luthuli, you didn't mention your media house. If I could just ask you, sorry, I forgot in the beginning.
Oh, sorry. I'm from an entity called IFSA. IFSA stands for Economic Interventions Forum of South Africa. Thank you.
Oh, all right, I see. Okay, thank you. All right, then I think there was a Miss Luthuli as well. Please, Miss Luthuli, over to you.
Thanks, Michael.
And the
Good
media
afternoon,
house, sorry, my
Minister.
dear.
Yes, this is Zami Luthuli from AFP, the French news wire. I just wanted to ask the minister, there were reports that Minister Mantashe refused to sign a $1 billion green transition deal launched on Tuesday by the Dutch and Danish governments, saying that he hadn't, previewed or seen the memorandum of understanding and wouldn't sign as a result. And with the minister now outlining the importance of diversifying our portfolio and moving towards green energy and hydrogen in particular, is there a level of resistance from any of the cabinet members towards moving towards green renewable at this point? Because there obviously is optimism expressed from the minister in moving forward, but it doesn't seem to be uniform throughout. Thank you.
Very clear. Thank you, Ms. Luthuli, for that. And then finally, let's take Xolani. And if you'll also be kind enough to introduce your house, your media house, please, Xolani. And I see if the questions, Xolani, are different to what you've posted in the chat, proceed. If not, just indicate because they are clear there. Thank you. Peli, you can unmute Xolani.
He's
Yes,
been
Xolani.
given permission to
Okay.
speak.
Now, I was saying, no, it's the same question I've raised on the Q&A. So thank you for the opportunity.
And which is your house, your media house, Xolani?
No, I'm just from the private side. I'm in no media house, yeah.
Okay, all right, okay. Oh, sorry, I was speaking to myself. Thank you very much. As we draw to a close after this round, can I invite, I think I'm gonna, if it's okay, I'm gonna start with Rudy, and then Eric, and then Minister, I'd like to invite you to field those and then perhaps wrap us up for the day, if that's okay. Thank you, Rudy, over to you.
I'll start off with Xolani's question related to the just energy transition. So I think what is important is that historically we are one of the first countries to enter into a just energy transition partnership with some countries of the global north, and I think this is important. So we're laying the groundwork. It's groundbreaking, and it's quite important. So we're learning as we're doing along. It's not a case study. Sorry, this is quite serious, right? So it's not a case study. But what is important is quite critical around what we've done so far. So in our partnership already, there's been a commitment of 8.5 billion plus an additional amount with the additional partners that have signed up during the course of last week. That's the Dutch and the Danes. We've, as of last year, as you may recall, the Cabinet adopted the investment plan. This has gone through an extensive consultation process, and we in the process of developing an implementation plan for that, and working quite closely with a whole set of different government and partners outside of government in implementing this, including with our partners who are supporting this. So I think this is quite important. The second part of the question is, of course it is. I mean, you could build 2 power stations, but this is part of the decisions that we've taken. It's critical policy choices that we've made around, for instance, around decommissioning, policy choices around net zero, policy choices around our NDC targets that we've made. And therefore it makes viable sense, right? Because it's the least cost. It's the least cost here of investment in renewables. I think it would be slightly short-sighted to simply see it only as variable in the sense of how you've put it, that is 25 to 30% of total load. There are, of course, technologies that are advancing, battery storage, or all forms of storage that are going to be quite critical. So as we build and expand 50 gigawatts of renewable energy, that's what we require by 2030. It's important that we invest quite significantly so in various forms of storage, so that we don't lose significant loss as a result of the investments in them. So it's cheaper, it makes logical sense, it's our commitments towards our decarbonization efforts, towards net zero. That's going to be quite critical. It does not prohibit, though, as the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy develops an updated integrated resource plan on a whole set of other technologies. And I think it's quite important. The minister, for example, has spoken about nuclear, for example. The minister has, I'm talking about Minister DMRE, has spoken about gas as transitional, for example. And these are important technologies that we have to look at. But right now, the least cost investment is renewables, variable renewables, coupled with storage facilities, and that's both battery and hydro and pump storage. Let me just say, and we've provided this information on a regular basis, that even through public procurement, as we look at various rounds, as the minister here has announced that, there is another process underway as we have changed, for example, particular rules around private sector generation and private sector embedded generation. So whether we follow a public procurement process on renewables or any other forms of technology, what we are seeing as a result of the tweak that we've made within Schedule 2, where we've removed the cap related to the licensing regime, where private sector investments in generation space could produce at no cap whatsoever. And what we have seen is that by far more than 95% of the investment is in the renewable energy space, and that's what has happened. So we currently have 13.3 gigawatts of grid transmission that has been allocated to private sector and to public sector embedded generation, into renewable generation space. And it makes sense because it is cheaper, and it's part of our commitment towards a net zero and reducing our carbon emissions in terms of our commitments under the UNFCCC framework that we've signed up with. So yeah, I mean, it may sound quite simple that we could just build 2 power stations. By the way, the last 2 power stations had an excess in the initial cost that is there. And of course, it's going to be impossible to find funding if it is. You've not spoken about the technology there. But if you're talking about and suggesting that we build two plants totaling 9,000 megawatts on coal, it is unlikely that we are able to find funding. We have reformed the market space. We've allowed for opening up of embedded generation from the private sector, and it makes sense from us from a least cost perspective to continue doing that as we embark on other technologies, on storage facilities. That's going to be quite critical. And I want to make that point because I think it's quite critical in relation to the choices that we've made as a country. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dix. Eric?
Yeah, Mike, thanks a lot. I think just to maybe respond to the funding question, what I can confirm is that funding should not be an excuse in the generation portfolio for the next 3 years. We've secured sufficient funds in terms of the debt, agreement. We will fund the generation operational capital program through the tariff. And, I think there's been good work by the CFO and his team, and plans underway to actually ensure that we actually do what we have and what we've planned and what's been approved as the generation recovery plan. As you know, the focus is on the priority 6 stations, but we're now also moving on to the next 2 stations. So there's a priority 8 stations, and we believe with those 8 stations, you get the 20-80% lever. We know what we need to fix. And I think another question raised was, in terms of the improvement of the EAF, is it attributed to the lower PCLF? What I can confirm is that, yes, we do drop, the PCLF, but when you look at month on month, in terms of the May, we're still on track with our PCLF. We do get, lower partials during winter, but the improvement in the breakdown performance has made a difference. I mean, we have to admit that and actually reflect that. The issue around EAF, I think we've last seen levels of 60% in August 2022. I think it was just above 61%. And, we've seen at least a 7 basis points improvement in EAF in the current weeks that we're trending. I still want to stress it's early days. I think we're cautious, but I'd like to be the eternal optimist. And we will continue pushing, the agenda, holding the managers accountable. I think the group executive is very, very clear in terms of his mandate, the sense of urgency, and let's not start with excuses. Let's start with the solution. So that's the general tone in the generation business. Thank you.
Thank you kindly, Eric. And as we move then to close, can Eric just keep an eye there? 1 or 2, and Mr. Morkel has posed a question there, which I'm sure you can field offhand. And then also thank you very much, Zakhele, for the very gracious comments. We will keep trying. As Minister has said, from the very first day he took office and from the very first meeting, it's a team effort that's going to fix this. And I think we can call it, Minister, Team South Africa. That we're going to do this together, including Team South Africa being our esteemed colleagues from the media. So as I hand to Minister Ramokgopa to close up, just one thing, colleagues, with all due respect, I've noted some of the comments in the chat and the queue. As much as we appreciate folks who are not from the media having quite a lot of passion and interest in it, our senior media team here from various media houses, it's really a media opportunity. So perhaps we might want to find another way in which stakeholders, analysts, commentators, lobby groups, etc., could find a platform. But I think let's also please try our level best to remember that a media engagement is really prioritizing that opportunity in terms of the existing concept of government-media relations to provide that place for media to have their opportunity. So I'm not closing any doors, but I just want to ask for that degree of a sense about what the platform is about. But anyway, thank you very much. With that being said, I'd like to hand to the Minister, who would then take us to the end of the session. Minister Ramokgopa, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Maybe just to make the point, Michael, that we do appreciate this opportunity. And to Mtunzi's point, you are absolutely correct. I think the lessons from China and Vietnam, our recent visit, they are particularly instructive. I mean, China has got an installed capacity of 440 gigawatts of PV and 380 gigawatts of wind. And they do make the point that the grid is something that requires attention. And when you try to understand the cost of these renewables, you must allocate that grid cost. The expansion and the strengthening of the grid must be allocated somewhere. And therefore, the true cost of renewables is not just putting up solar farms or if you like, wind farms, but it's also the cost associated with strengthening the grid. And that's the true cost. And that's why we're putting together, of course, as a requirement in Cabinet, a report of what has been our lessons and what are those part of those lessons that can be exported into our environment. I mean, you go to Vietnam, it approximates the South African energy ecosystem in relation to the configuration of the grid is concentrated in one area. The load is, of course, unlike with us also is in the north, the load 72%, but the areas of potential for renewables and in the instance is largely about the PV. It's in areas where there is no strong grid connection, and therefore it compromises, if you like, the integrity of the grid. The scale at which they rolled out, the pace at which they were connecting, had a significant impact on the grid. And in fact, as we speak now, they are having a situation of where demand far exceeds generation. And of course, they want to come and learn from us, how do you do load shedding? Because where they are seated is that they never thought that it will be possible to equitably distribute, if you like, the ability to deny people access to electricity in the interest of protecting the grid, what you and I refer to as load shedding. So out of this very difficult situation, a crisis, I think we've begun to understand better how to balance the grid. But to your point, yes, I think I will not necessarily dispute a lot of the things that you have raised. I mean, I'm on record as saying that renewable energy thrives on the redundancy of thermal power. That's not base load, so it has to be meshed with some storage capacity, and we know the life of batteries is about 4 hours. With the existing technology, of course, it continues to improve. And what worries me is that in the conversation, there's very little about pump storage, and which is what we are going to elevate into the conversation. And to Ms. Lutuli's point, well, I'm not qualified to know what the reasons are. And of course, I'm not in a position to confirm whether it's true or not what is reported in the media. I'm sure that there will be a communication coming out, and I'm referring to the allegation that Minister Mantashe refused to go and sign on that green power, as it's referred to. Maybe just to conclude, to say that we are doing everything possible. Just a message to South Africans: we're doing everything possible to resolve load shedding. You can see there's a stepwise improvement. We have always known that it's not the flick of a switch that is going to eradicate load shedding. It's going to take dedication from the men and women at the ESCOM power stations, and we are beginning to see the fruits of this effort. I am more than confident. Like I've said before, we are going to resolve load shedding. We are adding these megawatts. We are able to illustrate to you the number of capacity improvements that we are making, the demand side, how we bring down, if you like, demand as a result of our innovative interventions with regards to demand side management, the issues around new generation. Of course, the new conversation now is how do you connect these new generation sources onto the grid, and the need for us to expand the lines and strengthen the grid. And the number of 210, of course, it's an approximation of the studies that were done before. And I'm sure that as we improve the robustness of that computation, will arrive at a more precise number. So we're using that essentially as a guide on what is required. So we continue to do this. And I must say, Michael, in conclusion, I've agreed with the head of generation at ESCOM. We will visit those stations that illustrate the best improvement over a 14-day period, just to say to the workers, please keep on going. And those will mention them publicly. These are the stations that are showing significant improvement, because we must celebrate those who perform. And I'll also go to the stations that are underperforming, and I will not mention who those stations are. Of course, we'll see them because the numbers are made public. Just to say, let's make additional efforts to improve the situation. Like I said, our answer is in the installed capacity there at ESCOM. The new generation gives us resilience going into the future. The quickest way out of this situation is to ensure that we extract maximum performance from those installed units. And I really want to say to Mr. Bekking and the team, they must continue doing the excellent work, and the station managers. We are going to defeat load shedding. We are going to build a buffer. The economy will recover. We'll show a degree of resilience going forward. Thanks, Michael, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Minister Ramokgopa and the colleagues there. Thank you so much to members of the media for joining us on a Sunday afternoon. It's 14:30 Opticop. Let's call it a day. I hope that you have enough content. There was to be a presentation circulated, but Peliswa and Minister's team can deal with it offline and assist yourselves. Thank you very much. Minister, sincere thanks. And I think colleagues, South Africans at large, our media team, our friends in the media, we will get over this, and our economy will grow and boom, and we'll have jobs for young people, and we will get over this time. So we do that as a resilient nation, and we will be back in due course to share with you what happens in the next 10 days or so. So thank you very much for giving us your time. And I do want to thank ministry team, as well as the GSAS team, for the effort and the work done to make seamless preparations for us to be here today. It's highly appreciated. Thank you very much. And our briefing for the Electricity Ministry and the NECOM update on load shedding is closed for today. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.